Hey folks, this week Jeff joins me and we talk about a whole lot of stuff from the Intel Arc Battlemage card to the BadRam hardware attack. We talk about CentOS Stream 9, the new Proton version, and the new spin of Fedora with Cosmic. That and more, it's a whole lot of fun. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 182, recorded Saturday, December the 14th. Sketchy patches. Hey folks, it is Saturday and it is time to get geeky with Linux and open source and, well, Firefox and browsers and all kinds of stuff we're talking about before the show. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, it is a little bit different. It's an all-star show. It's a superstars only show. It's me and Jeff.
Yeah, we've done this before,
Indeed.
On this show and other shows.
Yes. Yes.
So we got it.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not a problem. I've just always said, please don't make me do a monologue. I need somebody else there, but the two of us, we got it, no problem. And we got a lot of news to talk about. It seems like this was the week that a lot of things happened.
It did. There was quite a bit. And I'm going to warn you now, I got a lot of stories, and they're longer stories. So
yeah.
So we got a lot to cover.
So we're going to do hardware first, right? There's something new in the hardware world. There's several new things in the hardware world, but one in particular I'm interested in, and obviously Jeff is too. What's the big new thing?
Well, in case you've not been paying attention to the tech news, Intel has released a couple of Battlemage video cards. Now, Michael Larrable over at Phronix has been doing some benchmarking on the B580, which is the faster the cards and has results in both compute and gaming. I don't know if the embargo is released yet on the 570, so we're only going to talk the 580 today. Now, the Battlemage cards use the XE2 graphics from Intel, and he does make mention that to get the cards to work, kernel 6.12 or greater will be required, along with Mesa 24.3 or greater. If you can run even newer, it will be better, as Intel has been pushing out updates quite frequently to fix minor issues that have come up in certain situations. Now, the tests compare the 580 to older Intel cards and several 40 series NVIDIA and 7000 series AMD cards. Now, first, we're going to look at compute, which the results are all kind of rather all over the place. There are many compute benchmarks, the cards hanging with a 4070 or 7800 AMD card. And there's others where it doesn't do so hot. For example, Blender, the 580 is behind the last gen Intel cards, but there is a high kernel latency bug or high latency kernel bug in the driver, and expect that to be fixed in the near future. Michael even does mention that he's going to really monitor the drivers, and as improvements go in, he's probably going to re-benchmark a bunch of things. So now, in cases where it doesn't excel and there isn't a driver issue, the Battlemage cards run right around an NVIDIA 460 or an AMD 7600. I do need to mention that this card is $250 US, and that is if you can find it. As of Saturday the 14th, as we're doing the podcast now, the cards are out of stock at all major retailers. I believe the reason being, while it isn't the fastest card out there, it is the fastest at the $250 price point. In the cost for performance, the Intel 580, for cost versus performance, I should say, the Intel 580 card is crushing AMD and NVIDIA. It's a very high bang for your buck in that lower price point, which a lot of people are at. Not everybody can drop monstrous amounts of money on a new video card. Now, I know some of you are saying, fine, Jeff, compute is all well and good, but I plan to play games and I'm not going to do scientific research on my machine. To that, I say, look at the second article in the show notes where Michael has the gaming benchmarks. Michael has an Intel 285 CPU for these benchmarks, and he had it as well in the compute benchmarks. And he doesn't make mention of it in the article, but you do need to have resizable bar to get the most out of this GPU. So you need an Intel 10th generation or newer CPU, or you need an AMD 3000 series CPU or newer. Now, you can use it on an older system, but the performance is going to be reduced. So the benchmarks won't apply if you're putting it on an even older machine. Now, the games that he tried are a mix of Proton and native, and we get mixed results. So while most all of the games ran, F122 did have a problem where the game would hang, so it doesn't have a good benchmark result on that one. Hardware Unboxed ran the B580 across a ton of games, and while there were a few that had some issues, almost all of them ran fine. So the card isn't perfect, but the reviewers I've seen have said that Intel is acknowledging the issues and working on the driver to fix the problems. On the Linux side, it's the same story where things are not 100% perfect, but they're 98% perfect, and the drivers are still getting love, so we should see issues fixed soon. Kind of a side note, the first generation from when they originally launched to current state had massive uplift in performance because they were continuously working on the driver, and they know there's issues with the driver, so it's going to get love. Now, that might also mean if you're getting a card that you might have to upgrade the kernel to fix an issue if your distribution is a little behind on kernel updates, or if there's something coming out in a kernel version or Mesa version that you deem that you have to have right away. But after all this benchmarking, bottom line is the card cost per performance is just like the computation benchmarks, and that there isn't anything that can touch it for the price. It runs probably around this AMD 7600 or NVIDIA 460 in performance, maybe slightly behind it right now with the current state of drivers, but it's solidly in the neighborhood. I think it's great that Intel's getting the win across the review sites for the card, which Intel needs right now. And keep in mind, the GPU and the CPU teams are totally different. So while we might have issues with our trust in the CPUs, the GPUs are different beasts and have not had any cause for concern. Temperature and power draw for the card's been good. It runs around 65 C and 140 watts. Throwing a little cold water on the party for Intel, though, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that we'll be having new cards from both AMD and NVIDIA coming out soon, though NVIDIA is expected to come in, and the NVIDIA cards are expected to come out in January, or at least announce the 590 and 580. So getting a 560 series of card might take a while. I don't know of the timing of the AMD 8000 series cards, so I know they're not going to compete on the high end, but with this series of cards, I don't know when the 8600 level of card is going to come out. Is it going to be about the same time as NVIDIA, a lot sooner? I don't know. But we also don't know the pricing, so they might come out, be faster, but might be a lot more expensive. Or they come out at the $250 price point and Intel drops their price. So it's kind of expected that Intel's probably going to drop their price in the future when the other cards are released, depending on their performance and value. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get a new video card, want to try something new, the Intel Battlemage is a good card. It's good value, and it's definitely a recommended purchase. Across all the different reviewers I've seen, both at Phoronix and across the major, Gamers Nexus, Jay's 2 Cents, Linus Tech Tips, and so on, Hardware Unboxed, they all really like the card. So, it's definitely something people have good reviews on. Let me know your thoughts on the Discord about the Intel GPUs, and I look forward to reading the comments.
Yeah, I've been looking very interestingly at this as well. I don't think it would be. I don't remember exactly what I'm running. I'm not sure that it would be an upgrade at this point. But for $250, it's really compelling.
Oh yeah, especially if you're, there's a lot of people still on 900 series cards, or, AMD 580s, if you're in 1000 series NVIDIA, definitely an upgrade.
And it's basically the first, it's the first card that's really worth looking at in this price point for a long time now. It seems like this is kind of the price point that everybody has abandoned. It's sort of the under $300 range. There's not been much there. So,
yeah, and that's why, people say, well, it's barely hangs with a 460. Well, but the 460 costs more money. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have, when you look at, frames per price or per dollar, this Intel card is just really top of the charts.
Yeah. It's very cool. Very cool. So there's a, this is interesting timing. There's a thing that I am going to talk about. I don't know how much Jeff is going to be able to talk about this because it's sort of in the realm of where he actually works. So there are certain things that he's just not allowed to really comment on, but I found it super interesting. And then we'll see if Jeff has any comments at the end of it. But I want to talk about something called BadRam and what exactly this means and why it's important and why it's not entirely specific to Linux, but why it's related to Linux. So BadRam is an attack on AMD's secure virtualization. So, and it's all about how RAM chips work. I happen to have one here. Now, this is a DIM from a laptop, but it is actually recent enough. I don't think I can get this close enough. You've got your memory chips, right? So you've got, like you see on this side, you've got 4 memory chips. If you look on the back, and again, I don't think I can get this close enough. There's a little tiny here. I'll lean way towards the camera. There's a little tiny chip right there. And that is actually an EEPROM, EEPROM. And that's just it's a piece of memory. So a lot of times they'll be, as little as like 1,000 bytes or even 512 bytes, 1K, 2K. It's sort of in that range. It does not take very much. A lot of EEPROMs are very small. And they store some bytes, and they're usually they're usually I2C, so I squared C. And in my experience, they tend to be on address 50 for any 0x50, so hexadecimal 50. That's pretty much the standard. And it's just you send a request and you say, hey, send me your bytes back. And it'll send back a string of bytes. Useful for a lot of things for doing programming configuration on hardware. In the RAM specification, the size of RAM and things like the timing. So like it's a 4 gigabyte stick. It's an 8 gigabyte stick. Here's the different timings that this stick supports. Those are stored on the EEPROM. And so you plug the EEPROM, or you plug the entire stick into your motherboard. You turn the computer on, and one of the first things it does, this happens faster than you can even think about it. It sends out a signal and says, hey, send me back the bits from that EEPROM. The EEPROM sends it back, and then the motherboard goes, okay, I've got 3 sticks of RAM. These are the sizes, and these are the timings, and brings up the RAM, starts to initialize the system. That's what EEPROM on a RAM stick does. The idea of BadRam is, what if we told that EEPROM, what if we put something different in there? What if the EEPROM lied? So say you've got a 2 gigabyte stick and the EEPROM says, oh no, I'm a 4 gigabyte stick. What is going to happen? And it turns out that you get something called aliasing, which aliasing pops up in a lot of different contexts. In graphics, you have aliasing to worry about. In audio, you have aliasing to worry about. And to put it very simply, it's sort of when things appear that aren't really there because of various reasons. And so in this context, what will happen is you have almost like a second copy of RAM, because you have to think about it like if your RAM, say your select lines, if you were to give them a bit value, and so if you only have 2 gigabytes, and this is obviously not going to be entirely accurate, it's just to understand what's going on here. So if you have 2 gigabytes, your select line might be 8 bits long. It's obviously more than 8 bits, but just stick with me here. It'll be 8 bits long. And if you have a 16 gigabyte card, it's going to be, longer. Let's say 12 bits or 9 bits, whatever, what have you. On the smaller card, you can set, or on the smaller RAM stick, you can set those extra bits, the ones hanging off the end, to whatever you want to, and it doesn't matter because there are just, there's this amount of RAM physically to get to. And then, so what happens is if the computer thinks that it has more RAM than it actually does, you end up getting the same physical RAM twice on the memory address. So like you'll have one address that points to a specific bit of RAM, and then you have aliased another address that points to the same bit of RAM. And why that turns into a problem is because the processor is managing security based on the RAM addresses. And so it's saying this memory address is reserved for such and such virtual machine. We're not going to let anything but that virtual machine change it. Well, if you have an aliased address, you can start at the virtual machine. The processor can do its fancy cryptography thing, and then another process can use the other memory address and go in and fiddle with that memory. So it's they call it BadRam. It's all about this idea of aliasing bits so that you can get to them more than once, and it is quite a security problem. But AMD already has a fix out for it. I think it's AMD specific. They are now, during boot up, they're checking for aliased addresses. And if they find any, I think it just fails to boot. But super interesting security story, and that's why it's Linux specific, because it has to do with virtual machines and some things like that. But I found it really, really fascinating. I've got links in there to go in and learn more about it if you want to.
Now, is that coming from when you purchase the RAM, or is it on your machine they have ability to?
Right. So the deal is that it's what they're thinking about with it. It's not when you purchase it. What they're thinking about is like if someone is in a cloud environment, and so they've got a virtual machine that's off in a data center somewhere, maybe where someone else owns the actual hardware and they're just running a virtual machine. Well, you've got AMD's secure virtualization stuff that is designed to give you some assurances that your virtual machine is not being tampered with, even if somebody else owns the hardware. And so what this does is it can be used to defeat that assurance. Now, if you're talking about your own computer, it's nothing to worry about. You know, you've got to literally get to the RAM either with like probes or maybe even desolder that EEPROM and hang something else off of it. Like, this is not an entirely trivial attack. But for that particular instance, it could be a problem.
Okay, well, I was just wondering if it was maybe something larger. They had sending out a bunch of sticks of RAM like that or something. Because that's where I was going to say, make sure you buy your RAM from a known company. Get it from Crucial, Samsung, Hynix, Corsair, Kingston, something that you know the name. It's a trusted brand. Don't go with any third-party off brands. I don't care how cheap it is and how good of a deal it is. Just stick with the brands you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what's going on with BadRam, with memory. Jeff, there's something going on with desktops that's maybe some better news than this.
Yes, it definitely is better news. And I have another pair of stories, and this time centered around KDE. I know we all talk a lot about KDE, but it's a popular desktop, and there's a lot going on with the new focus on Wayland and the version 6 of the desktop. So it's pretty active right now. The first story is about KDE Gear 24.12 being released. And for those new to KDE, the desktop is basically built into three major components. You have the Plasma, where the graphics are handled, KDE Gears, where the programs are, and Framework is kind of like it sounds. It's the structure that lets everything interconnect. It's kind of the glue that holds the other two pieces together. Focusing on Gear, we have a lot of updates to several programs. For example, Ocular, which is a document reader, its main claim to fame is PDFs, but it can open all sorts of files and can sign and verify documents. They've now added support for more types of items in combo boxes and PDF forms. They've made the printing faster and more correct, so now you should get the correct output when you send it to a printer. And they've also fixed an issue when signing a document where the signature window would prematurely go away. We've got Cleopatra, which keeps track of your digital signatures and encryption keys and certificates, and it helps you sign, encrypt, and decrypt emails and confidential messages. They have redesigned the notepad and signing encryption dialog, and they put in the work to make sure messages and errors are a lot clearer. They also made a change so the recipients of your messages are shown beside the notepad, so you can see when you're typing something out who this is going to on the same window. Dolphin, which is the file manager for KDE, which if you're a user of KDE, you know it well. In this release, they put a lot of effort into accessibility and usability. They've overhauled the main view, so it should now work smoothly with screen readers, something which I think will be of help to me. They've upgraded the keyboard navigation. So pressing Control L multiple times will switch back and forth between focusing and selecting the location bar path and focusing the view. So your window, your pane where your actual files and stuff are. Pressing Escape in the location bar will now move the focus to the active view. This will be handy, especially when you have a split view, the commander style layout in Dolphin, which I personally use every once in a while, depending on, not always, but it's nice when you're working with a remote machine. You can have both things up at once. Sorting is also improved in Dolphin. Now a file called a.text will appear before a file called a_2.text. So a little more human readable sorting. You can now also sort your videos by duration. So if you have a big directory that you want to find the longest or shortest or whatever, now it's easy to do. The Properties, Dialogues, Checksum, and Permissions tab have been redesigned for easier file integrity checks. That change will also appear in other KDE applications as well. Now, if you listen to this show for a few episodes, you've heard us talk about KDEN Live or Kden Live, which is a video editor. And they've added the ability to resize multiple items on a timeline all at once. So that might not sound like a lot, but there's a lot of people that are really excited about this being able to resize multiple things at once. Did you know KDE has a sound editor? K-Wave has been on the back burner for a while, but it's getting love again. And it's been ported to Qt6, so now it will work natively with KDE 6. They've also refreshed the interface by changing some of the icons to better match with the current desktop style. And by doing this, it will also allow for easier indication when playback is paused. Now, there are more updates that have happened, so take a look at the first link in the show notes for the full details of the applications I've skipped over or details I've skipped over on the applications I did cover. So I definitely had some brevity in that story. The second link in the show notes talks about updates to Plasma 6.3. Biggest information coming from Nate Graham's blog is there is now better fractional scaling support. So when using scaling, there should be a sharper image now and no gaps between windows and their shadows and other weird little artifacts like that when you're zooming in and using scaling. When zooming in at high levels, the interface switches to a pixel-perfect representation and overlays a grid on the screen so you can see how each individual pixel looks. So designers and artists should love to see this feature because it should make the detail work much easier when you're designing, like, maybe you're into fonts, windows, icons, or something like that, and you can really zoom in and see how it actually looks on your desktop and see which pixels you might have to tweak a little bit. Now, speaking of artists, there's now an option for screen color accuracy, but it's going to have an effect on system performance. So gamers are probably not going to want to throw that switch, but if you have to have exact color accuracy, well, there's a switch for that now. Now, if you hate the double click on an edge of a window to maximize it horizontally or vertically, now they've added a toggle so you can turn it on or off in settings, so you don't always have to be forced with that. Now, there's many more bugs squashed, which I won't go into, but one thing I did want to touch on is performance increase for the clipboard. So instead of a custom internal format, the clipboard is now going to use an SQL-Lite database. This improves reliability, support for saving many data types, and memory efficiency, especially with images. So take a look at the article in the show notes for more details. It also has a link to Nate's blog for each and every change. And, I'll be honest, I can't wait till my distribution of choice, which is Kubuntu, moves to 6.3 or later, as it seems like there's a lot of polish at this point, and the desktop is really getting defined for KDE 6.
Mm-hmm. I've been enjoying it. You mentioned Kden Live, and I recently discovered something. Kden Live on Fedora has had a problem with when you go to render something out. At least the way I've been doing it, 1080p MPV. The audio and video is desynced for me. So you go to some of the Floss Weekly episodes. Yeah, go 3 or 4 weeks back, go to Floss Weekly and just watch, and you'll see some of them are pretty bad. Like a second desynced, and that's a lot. You definitely can notice that. Yeah. And so I sat down, I'm like, all right, what can I do to fix this? There's got to be something. And I ended up installing Kden Live, the Flatpak version, through Discover. And the last couple times I've rendered out with that, and it's not been a problem. So it must be something with the Fedora, because Kdenlive uses your codecs from your system, right? So it must be something with the codecs that Fedora is using that you get a different codec pack inside of the Flatpak version.
Yeah, maybe there's a FFmpeg version or something that's off, or one of those libraries that just either picked up a regression or is one behind, and there's a bug squash that hasn't been picked up yet.
Or honestly, it might even be where Fedora does not want to ship some version of a library because there's patent issues, and you get that a lot with codecs. So it could even be related to something like that. There is one other little bit of news that goes along with this, and we've been watching the Wayland color management protocol. And that's basically the thing that's got to land in Wayland before we start getting HDR across all of the desktops, and then also supported in browsers. And it has now hit 3 ACKs. That's what the term they use, acknowledgements. And that is essentially the requirement for something to land. One of the big requirements is 3 of the right people had to say, yes, we agree, we sign off on this. And that has now happened. And so I expect within the next probably couple of weeks for this to land. And I also expect that once it lands, you're going to see things like, hopefully, engineers at Google with Google Chrome will start adding support for it. So hopefully soon.
Hello, HDR.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk about a desktop option that is not KDE. I am not running it yet, but boy, I'm really thinking about it. And that's Cosmic. And Cosmic not on Pop! OS, but Cosmic on Fedora. Everybody's favorite, well, some of our favorite distros. I guess it's not everybody's favorite. It should be everybody's favorite distro. I've got a link off to the Fedora wiki. I think I originally saw this on Phronix, but the actual story is on the wiki here, and that is that they are proposing a change for Fedora. What is this going to be? Fedora 42. Fedora 42 coming soon. To do a full-on spin of the Cosmic desktop. So they are already planning. There's already a SIG. They are already planning to add support for Cosmic for Fedora. In fact, I think in Fedora 41, you may be able to run it already. And so there is the plan is, it's a proposal. It's not approved, but I imagine it's going to get approved. The plan is that there's going to be an actual spin. So you can get a live DVD. You could do an install of Fedora Cosmic now. I'm pretty excited about this, and I find it fascinating that Cosmic is so new, and there are so many people as excited about it as they are. And I think having a Fedora spin is going to be just kind of the next step in really it coming into its own. So it's going to be cool.
I think that's going to really, it seems like KDE's kind of got its legs now, and it's really, it stumbled there for a while. GNOME, I don't know, seems like they've they're in a stumble period, but Cosmic seems like it's really coming up fast, and I could see it being a number 1 desktop. Give it a couple more years, get it polished, and get it kind of ready for production, as they say. I could see Cosmic taking over, surpassing KDE and GNOME, or at the very least hanging right in there.
I don't think it's ridiculous to suggest that in another few years, the big 2 desktops on Linux are going to be KDE and Cosmic.
Well, I hope GNOME just really kind of gets their legs back under them and kind of gets a direction and stops breaking compatibility. And because it seems like every so often they rev up, and then it really upsets a lot of people, which just think you've written some application, widget, whatever, and it took hours and you worked, you poured your heart into it.
Yep.
And then they went, we changed the API. It's not compatible. So now you have to rewrite everything. And you're just like, do I even want to go through that again?
Yep.
It was working great. And
it's not even just GNOME that's doing that, though. There's been deals, especially KDE on 6. There's been some things that had to be rewritten to get 6 working. I think the thing that really annoyed people with GNOME, though, is that in KDE there were still ways to do it. In GNOME, there were some of those features that they kind of just removed, and there suddenly weren't like some of the theming things just went away altogether, or at least it was threatened to.
Well, and I think it's a little different. So KDE went through this from version 3 to version 4. They had to do a major rewrite, and it was painful, and it was long and arduous. But at that time, they wrote in the ability to be more flexible, so any future major changes were a lot smoother. So 4 to 5 was not near the issue that 3 to 4 was, and going from 5 to 6 isn't as bad as it was going from 3 to 4. Now, you could also argue that going from 5 to 6, I mean, you're changing from X to Wayland. That's a major overhaul versus some of the GNOME stuff. They kind of changed things, but I don't know that. I mean, it's not like they were going through that big of okay, we need to break compatibility or really change things because we're going strictly to Wayland, or we're going. I mean, sometimes they kind of just, we're kind of changing direction and break things. And
so I would say that GNOME is more opinionated than KDE is. And when they change things and they're opinionated, that is where you tend to run some people away. I would say that is the main difference.
I can't argue with that. I mean, I can totally see that viewpoint, and I can totally see how being so opinionated, it kind of, when you really put your stake in the sand and say, here's the line and this is it, some people are going to go, I'm not on your side.
That's not it for me. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on and let's talk gaming a little bit. And Proton, I see there's a new Proton release out.
There is. And, I guess I was kind of really glomming on this because if anybody didn't know, if you're using Steam, it was, I believe, Friday night they had the Steam Game Awards. So if you like to see what's coming and see all that stuff, it's on there, so you can see it on YouTube, you can see it on Steam. But what we're going to talk about right now is Proton 9.0-4 has been released, and I think my propensity for gaming is rather well known on the podcast. So just always love to see this new Protons and make things play better. Now, this release comes 3 months after the -3 release came out and brings a lot of games which are now playable. So like Conker's Blade, Cube Hero, Odyssey, Disgaea 4, Complete Plus, Star Quest, Sniper Elite, Nazi Zombie Army 2, that's AMD GPUs only, Total War Shogun 2, Warhammer 40K, Space Marine 2, which requires disabling the Steam overlay. But that's just a few of the games that they've now added to playable. I cut out several that you didn't want to hear me read for that long. Now there is even some regressions fixed, like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic no longer launches to a black screen when in full screen mode, and games now launch on the correct screen on setups with multiple monitors connected to multiple GPUs. Again, many others are fixed. That's just a small sampling of things they've fixed. There are other fixes to games that were playable, but they just made things better, such as improved font rendering in Spellforce 3 Versus Edition, and reliable mod support in Doom Eternal, along with improved video playback in games like March of Empires and Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition. Who doesn't love smooth cinematic sequences? Now you've got them back. Now, they've also added things which are a little more under the hood, such as adding support for NVIDIA Optical Flow API and DLSS 3. And if you don't know what DLSS is, it's a technology that allows smoother and faster frame rates in games that are demanding while it's keeping most of the visual quality. It's a way that they can kind of fudge textures, add frames in between. So if you're having a video card that's kind of struggling to play the game, this can get you up to your 60 frames or higher to make it a smoother play by kind of fudging things a little bit. Also under the hood are several updates to components that are used in Proton. So they updated Xyla or XALIA to 0.4.4 and enabled it for several games such as Oddworld, Stranger's Wrath HD, and Fallout New Vegas. They've updated Wine Mono to 9.3.1, which gives better .NET support. They've upgraded DXVK to version 2.5.1, and they've also included a regression fix from that version. So they've patched the new version. They've updated DXVK NVAPI to 0.7.1-94. So that's for NVIDIA integration. The VKD3D Proton moved up to version 2.13-241, which improves Direct 3D 12 support. Now they've also updated the VKD3D-shader to VKD3D-1.14, and they added a hack to make sure it runs with optimal performance and stability. So take a look at the article in the show notes. They also have a link to the release notes, and there's a ton of things I left out. I'm just trying to hit the high points here. There's a ton of games which had regression fixes. Many have been added to the playable list, and there's a big number which ran but might have had a little niggle that needed fixed. Improved performance, improved stability, or enabled some features. So take a look at the article and see what changed. Install a new Proton and go enjoy some games.
Yeah, I'm going to tag on a quick little story that I saw this week, and that is the NT Sync driver. There are some differences between the way that Windows NT and Linux does synchronization, and because of those differences, and because they're having to be dealt with, in user space, it slows games down. And there has been some work done to try to essentially port the Windows NT synchronization things over to Linux, specifically for use in Wine and Proton. And the patch set, we just got a version 7, and it's coming along. It's being, if I see correctly, it's being fairly well received in the kernel mailing list. No one is throwing a fit over it. It's good to see this making its way through and hopefully eventually landing. But the thing that really caught my attention is if you go to the Phoronix article, there is a kind of a chart. It's not one of Michael's normal charts. It's just a text chart taken right from the mailing list, I think. But it shows the improvement for some of these games in frame rate. And the one that really got me was the 678% improvement on Dirt 3, which jumped from 110 frames per second to 860 frames per second. And then you also see here Resident Evil 2 was running at 26 frames per second, and with the patches is running at 77 frames per second. That's 196% improvement. So this is not a little deal. This is a big deal. It is a big improvement for some of these games, and I would love to see this actually land.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the data here, and the lowest improvement is 21%, which is Metro 2033 goes from 164 frames to 199 frames. That's significant. I mean, that is
a significant change, and that's the smallest one on the.
Yeah, that's your worst case.
Yes.
In the sampling that is here. So yeah, that's huge.
I am hopeful that will eventually land. Hopeful. And Michael seems to be as well. He talked about maybe within the next couple of kernel versions, we'll see it finally get into the kernel.
Well, it's good when nobody's complaining, nobody's throwing a fit. I think that really should.
It's a good sign.
That's a good sign. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Let's see. I think it is time to talk about. Oh yes, my weekly screed against hardware manufacturers being terrible. Present company excluded, of course. Qualcomm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this one is Qualcomm, actually. Qualcomm makes ARM core processors, and even ARM core processors had problems with the Spectre flaw. That was one of those speculative execution. Basically, there is a way to read RAM bits that you're not supposed to be able to read. This is different than the aliasing we talked about at the beginning of the show. This is, it's a side channel attack. It's the ability to look at timing things with the cache and figure out what's inside of RAM. Super interesting. If you want, we've talked about it before. I've covered it on Hackaday. You go and look for Spectre, and you can find all kinds of more information about it. The problem here is that Qualcomm CPUs, some of them have problems with Spectre and need mitigations to really run securely. And Qualcomm never bothered to upstream any of that information into the Linux kernel. And so you've got Douglas Anderson from Google, an engineer at Google, sent out patches for the kernel for the Qualcomm CPU cores. And he said, just so you know, he says, I've made an attempt at guessing, and he's got that not in quotes, but very, very bold, guessing what the right patches should be to enable mitigations from Qualcomm CPU. This is mostly me searching the web to figure out what ARM cores various Qualcomm cores are based out of. He says the patches get more and more sketchy as the series progresses, and I've noted that the later patches don't even compile. I've included them to make it obvious that I think these cores are affected, even if I don't have all the right information to mitigate them. Hopefully Qualcomm can come and fix this mess for me. Oh, come on, Qualcomm, get with it. This is just as I said, your weekly reminder that some of these companies are just terrible members of the community and are not doing any of the things that they're supposed to be doing with getting their products supported in the Linux kernel. Shame on you, Qualcomm. Do better.
Yeah. Guessing. Oh, that's
not what you want to hear.
Yeah, we got a security mitigation. Maybe this will work. Give it a shot,
Although, so to be clear, no shade whatsoever thrown on Douglas Anderson. I almost said Douglas Adams. That's somebody different. No shade whatsoever on Douglas Anderson. He's doing the right thing here. He is he's letting folks know that it is a problem. He's doing his best,
yes,
and he is making it quite clearly known when it is a guess and the state of things. So
I should say it's a sad state of affairs that he has to try to pick up the slack.
Exactly.
If only they had billions in revenue that they could just, take a little time out of somebody's day to go, hey, why don't you fix this?
Yeah, I tell you what is interesting to do is to pull up the Linux maintainers file, and then search for it and see how many at Qualcomm addresses there are. I'm sure there are some. There have to be some.
You're hoping now. I hope so.
Oh, well, maybe Qualcomm is not at Qualcomm, because that didn't come up with anything. ARM Qualcomm. Let's see. I mean,
they had to get the original drivers in there and the original code. So I would think there's got to be somebody.
You would think so. You would hope so. At kernel.org, at kernel.org, at kernel.org. Yeah. At gmail.com, at poorly.run. There's some hilarious email addresses in here too, by the way. Yeah, I will look in the next story and see if we have any actual Qualcomm employees. I went kind of on a rant against Rockchip back a few weeks ago and made it clear even then though that there's like 2 or 3 at Rockchip or at Rock, whatever their domain is in the kernel maintainers list. So they're doing some. It would be kind of sad if Qualcomm doesn't even have any in here.
Unless they're thinking that the end companies are gonna, be the ones that'll supply all the code, and they supply the hardware, and then the equivalent would be like Intel supplying a CPU, and then like the Dells and HPs having to write the code to handle this stuff. But
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what is up next. We're
going to talk about kernels.
Well, kernels and Arch Linux. Is
Yeah.
Jeff? Are you going to run Arch? By the way,
I don't think so yet. Actually, in all honesty, if Kubuntu doesn't go with a much more modern KDE on 25.04, I would probably jump to. There's a good chance I might go to Fedora.
the water's nice. Come on in.
Yeah, I mean, well, and partially because when I ran 40, it ran good, even when it was KDE 6.1 and beta, and it was pretty rough, but it was smooth. It was good. It was I don't know, that possibility, or maybe go nuts and go and get on Cosmic or something. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see in a couple months what happens if they're going to update what they use.
So I do want to make clear, there are quite a few at Linaro.com email addresses. That appears to be Qualcomm. So there are some Linaro employees working on the kernel stuff, and those appear to be the Qualcomm people. So no rant needed.
Yeah. But it's kind of cathartic.
Well, yeah, it was. Okay. So tell us about the kernel.
So once in a while we talk about Arch in this show, and I know it can be a bit of a decisive distribution. And, it generally boils down to it's too cutting edge and breaks too much, too hard to install, versus you get the latest software and have more control of what you install. So I'm not going to answer that today, but since our audience is made up of people taking their first steps into Linux to people hacking the kernel, I thought today we'd touch on the mid-level of person. The person that your way around a distribution, and you're looking at getting into the next level of playing. So the fourth story I have in the show notes is about installing and switching between kernels in Arch. Now, I've done this with other distributions, but I didn't realize there are multiple flavors of kernels for Arch. I learned some things while writing the show notes today. I didn't realize all this, and honestly, it kind of made Arch a little more appealing to me. One of the first things I learned was there are 5 official kernels for Arch, and these are kernels that are either supported directly by Arch or trusted contributors. The first, of course, is the standard kernel, and that's the default, and when you load up Arch, that's what you get. But if you happen to be on something else and need to go back to the standard vanilla kernel, the command line default for that is sudo space pacman space dash capital S space Linux space Linux dash headers. So that'll install the generic kernel. The second kernel is the LTS. Basically, if you need more stability, you can load up an LTS. You get a kernel that doesn't change much other than updates for security fixes and critical bugs. Now, one could argue, why are you running Arch if you need server stability? But I'm not one to dictate what you should or shouldn't do, and I just give you the tools and let you decide what's best for your situation. To install the LTS, it's much like the previous commands, only -LTS is added to the command. So you'd get sudo space pacman space dash capital S space Linux dash LTS, and it's all lowercase, space Linux dash LTS dash headers. So that'll get you the LTS. Now, third on the list is the hardened kernel. Now, this kernel is, as it sounds, it's all about security and comes with patches and configurations which make your kernel as secure as it can be. To install it, replace the -LTS from the last command with -hardened, and again, all lowercase. Fourth on the list is a real-time kernel. Now, we've covered real-time kernels in the past, but what they are is to make sure tasks get handled when they need it. They get kernel attention when they need it. Now, this isn't a faster kernel. It just prioritizes things differently. Main use is in audio production, video editing, and other time-sensitive tasks where delays can be disruptive, such as, like if you're using the kernel in a self-driving car or some medical situation. So now this is the same as the last one. Change the LTS or the hardened out for a -RT. Again, all lowercase. Fifth one is one that would appeal to gamers. It's the Zen kernel, which is a community-driven project to get the most performance out of the kernel if they can. It contains multiple performance enhancements, scheduler tweaks, and other modifications to improve desktop interactivity and system responsiveness. Now, this would be a kernel for gamers, multimedia users, things like that. Now, installation, of course, is the same pattern. Sudo space pacman space dash capital S space Linux dash Zen space Linux dash Zen dash headers. So easy to go between the kernels. Now, one side note here, there might be someone who's wondering what the difference is between the RT kernel and the Zen kernel. And I think a decent analogy is people at a restaurant. With a Zen kernel, it's like you have a server who's trying to serve a dinner rush, and there are a few large tables. Now, the server's working as fast as they can and balancing extra plates to try and serve everyone, but they're taking care of some of the large tables first because they can get more stuff out of the kitchen. The person who's at the corner table alone could be waiting a while before they get attention. Now, while in the RT kernel example, a person sitting alone at the corner table is going to get taken care of much sooner, but because the server's running all around to take care of everyone, the overall service is slower. So I think that's kind of a high-level, decent analogy between the RT and the performance kernel. Now, in addition to the kernels I've mentioned, there are 5 more unofficial kernels in the article. They do say that there's a lot of overlap on the unofficial kernels with the official, but the unofficial ones are more focused for a lot more specific use cases. Because they're unofficial, you will need to use something like Yay, Y-A-Y, to install them. Now, while they're not official, they are in the AUR, which is the official Arch repositories. The article in the show notes goes over how to use Yay. We have the Liquorix kernel, I think Liquorix, which is best for gamers and desktop users who want snappier performance. There's the Xanmod, Xanmod, which is a performance kernel, but more targeted at heavy multitasking. The Libre kernel, Libre, which is kind of what it sounds like. It removes all proprietary firmware and drivers. Everything in the Libre kernel is going to be open source. The Clear kernel, which is like the kernel which is found in Intel's Clear Linux distribution. The Intel Clear Linux distribution is known for having performance improvements and being a very fast distribution for Intel CPUs and, to a lesser extent, AMD CPUs. But Clear Linux isn't friendly to being a general purpose distribution. It's geared more for like cloud computing, database work, and other enterprise tasks. It's also kind of a playground for Intel, so it's not always user friendly for newer users anyway. But this way you can have the performance of the kernel, of the Clear kernel, in a more friendly distribution. And finally, we have the CK kernel, which is also meant for heavy multitasking and intense workloads. So not only do you have a lot of things you're doing with your machine, but you have the machine maxed out with what it can handle. You're basically hammering the hardware as hard as you can. That's where the CK kernel would come in. So now if you take a look at the article in the show notes, it does go in how to switch between the kernels with grub and systemd-boot. And in both cases, they give you examples how to save the last kernel you booted in as the default until you use the menu to pick a new kernel, which then makes that one the default. So it's got persistence across reboots. So that's kind of good if you're running a few different ones based on workloads and you want to boot into several different ones. There's a lot of good information in there, and really go have a look and have a great time playing with kernels.
Yeah, very cool. One quick, maybe I misheard or you misspoke, but the AUR, that's the Arch user repository. That one's more semi-official, and I think technically anyone can upload packages to the AUR. I know they're pretty aggressive about getting rid of bad ones, and they've got some things in place to try to keep that as safe as possible, but not exactly the fully official repository that is the user repo. So,
okay, so it would be trusted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good work. Yeah, that's neat. I don't know if I'm ever going to take the Arch plunge myself, but definitely interesting to see the different kernels that they've got there.
I don't know. I mean, I've talked to people that love it, and I've had friends that have ran it and had, it was painful.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
And they had a lot of issues, and I'm personally I'm to the point I used to really play a lot in my distributions, and I still do somewhat, but I'm okay with like taking a step back from the edge and rather than being on the alpha edge, I'm okay with just playing with betas,
Yeah.
Maybe even refined betas, that's good enough without, because Lord knows I've rebuilt my system from, after I've messed things up multiple times.
So refined betas, that's an interesting unintentional segue, actually, or maybe it was intentional.
It was not intentional.
But it was good. So really just fell into that one then. CentOS Stream 10 is now out for general availability. And that means, or it comes along with, the fact that RHEL 10 just hit beta, and some other things that you may be more interested in running than RHEL 10, things like Alma Linux 10 are also in beta. And just for a quick reminder of the way this works over in Red Hat land, you have Fedora will have a release, and then after a couple of years, the Fedora code will then get, it's not even a couple of years. It depends upon where exactly things happen in the schedule. But the code from a Fedora release, I think in this case it's Fedora 40, gets worked on and refined, and any bugs that are found get fixed. Even after support for Fedora, the Fedora version ends. And that now becomes a CentOS Stream release, which is basically a continuation of what was in Fedora. And the Stream release then also becomes the beta for the next Red Hat Enterprise. And so we've got CentOS Stream 10 that is the same code that's going to be in CentOS 10. But if you have kind of like a flow chart, right? Like things land in Fedora first, and then they get a little bit more stable. They land in CentOS Stream, that gets more stable, and then it lands in places like Red Hat and Alma Linux. So just found it very, very interesting that Stream 10 is now generally available. And so if you want to do CentOS Stream on, which is a completely decent operating system, right? Like for doing even enterprise stuff, CentOS Stream is going to be a very decent way to go. And the plan is to maintain it until something like 2030. Of course, there's been a few of us that have been burned by trusting Red Hat's CentOS plans for how long they're going to maintain things. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But anyway, CentOS Stream 10 is out and planned to be around until 2030. So definitely something interesting to think about.
I would honestly question the need for that length of support on something that's not an industrial item.
So I've got bad news for you, Jeff. 2030 is like only 5 years away.
Oh, damn it.
I thought the exact same thing. I thought the exact same thing. I'm like, 2030, that's a long ways from now. Wait a second. It's almost 2025 already. 2030 is only 5 years away.
I thought we had a rule on the show, don't do the math.
We did the math this time.
Yeah.
And the reason why CentOS Stream will be developed for that long is because CentOS Stream is the upstream of RHEL. And so it's going to be supported for as long as RHEL is supported.
Well, in 5 years, isn't that? I was thinking, oh, that's going to be a lot longer. And then you said that, and I'm like, oh yeah.
It's not 2020 anymbe man.
I was living almost half a decade ago.
Yeah. Maybe gotten a show title out of that little exchange. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do some command line tips. Jeff has a Rust command line tip.
Well, I can't believe we haven't covered this yet.
Indeed.
And this one's going to be short, kind of, but this is one of those that could go into, all of next year could go into covering this one.
Mm-hmm.
So my tip is cargo.
Mm-hmm.
So the link in the show notes, even though it's going to be kind of short today, goes to a book It has 7 sections, many subsections, and multiple pages in many of the subsections. So what is Cargo? Cargo is the Rust package manager. Basically, it downloads your Rust packages, dependencies, compiles your packages, makes distributable packages, and uploads them to crates.io, which is the Rust community package repository. And it does a lot, even more than I just listed there.
Mm-hmm.
So where this came from is when you have a Rust library or executable, it's called a crate. Running a crate can be as simple as calling its name, but then there can be dependencies, external libraries, command line arguments, which need to be added. To simplify this, there's a higher level of abstraction called a package, which bundles up things that we're talking about into a nice, neat package. So you can almost think of it kind of almost like it's not necessarily the equivalent, but it's you can think of it kind of like a flat pack or a snap, where they kind of bundle a bunch of this stuff up for you, so you don't have to chase down dependencies and things like that. And that's where Cargo comes in. So now I'm just going to go over the simplest use case that there is for this, and I think it's the install command, which will install a Rust program that you want to have. So a simple sudo space cargo space install space and then your program name, that will get you. And I mean, that's what you need. I mean, it's kind of almost like apt or something where you just, sudo apt install whatever package, program you want to have. And it basically, in this case, in this small subset, it kind of works like apt. There's an install, uninstall, and search, which I think are the most basic. Now, uninstall is just like install, where you just replace install with uninstall. So you just, sudo space cargo space uninstall space program name, and it removes it. And search is just sudo space cargo space search, and then your query, whatever. Maybe kind of a program name, and it'll just kick back what it can find. Now, there's of course switches to go with all of those, and I won't go into any of those, but at least with the link in the show notes and what we've just talked about here, this should get you started if you're new to Cargo. And like I said, there's many other commands and options for creating and publishing Rust programs, and it really, like I said, this hole can go really deep depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to get with, handling your Rust program. So take a look at the book linked in the show notes for the details to the full power of Cargo. And we're probably going to cover a lot more of this in the future, but until then, happy rusting.
Yeah, very cool. When I was doing the advent of code on Rust, I was using Cargo quite a bit. The repository I found, it's set up to use Cargo to do things like scaffold out the solution and to download the different steps. So doing some Cargo stuff there for one thing, but two, it was real fascinating to me the flexibility of things that you could do with Cargo. Because that was pulling from something that wasn't necessarily a Rust package. It was adding files. Like it's got some flexibility to do what you need to do.
Oh yeah, I was kind of perusing through, and I'm like, oh wow, yeah, there could be command line tips out of that thing for the rest of the year of just different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so my command line tip is I just saw this because. It was one of the other distros put out a news story that they were encouraging people to use this. It's the name really tickles me. It's Switcheroo CTL. And so that's one thing that's real interesting about it. And it's got a couple of uses. So first off, it's probably already installed. All 3 machines that I've tried it on now have already had it installed on it. And if you just run it, it's going to tell you about your video cards. So, if you've only got one, it's going to tell you. So I ran it on the desktop over there, and it says, you've got a Radeon RX 590 Fat Boy 8 gigabyte card. I think that is the one that's in there. Yeah. But what Switcheroo CTL is really useful for is if you have more than one video card, Switcheroo is the program to use to launch something and pin it to the right video card. And so this is specifically for like laptops that will have a built-in AMD graphics card in the CPU, and then also has a standalone NVIDIA card. And that's been a problem on Linux for a long time. Honestly, it was a problem on Windows for a long time too. It for the longest time, it was not a great solution. And there were programs like Bumblebee and other things. And Switcheroo is the new fanciness, the new useful thing. And so you can just run Switcheroo CTL, and I think you give it. Let's see here. --help. -H does not do what you want it to do. --help is what you want. You can just tell it, you launch Switcheroo CTL launch, and then you give it a GPU and then the command you want it to run. And it'll launch your game or what have you. And you can specify which GPU to run it on. So if you happen to have one of those devices, or even I suppose a desktop with more than one GPU in it, that is the way to go about it. Now you know.
Very cool.
Yeah,
I like it.
It's useful. It tickles me that it's useful just to list what GPU you've got in the system. I find that.
Well,
fun.
it's funny how you stumble. I mean, I only got Cargo because I was looking at another program that I'm like, oh, I'm going to include this, and then then there's Cargo. I'm like, have we ever talked about Cargo? And I looked, and I'm like, wow, we've never actually mentioned it.
Yeah,
which I thought was surprising. And
Yep.
you never know where those tips are coming from.
It's true. Usually we get our tips from working on our Linux system throughout the week. That's where I try to find mine at. I find that to be the best kind of tips. Like, oh, I figured out how to do this cool thing. Let's write it down. We'll talk about that on Saturday.
A lot of times, yeah. Sometimes, you got to do a little searching. Just
sometimes
see what's out there. Or you just stumble across them,
True. All right. Is there anything you want to plug or any ending thoughts you want to leave us with?
Actually, two things. One is just going to be Poetry Corner. The other is, I forgot to mention on the Intel Arc card, it is a 12 gigabyte card, which there are some people saying with the, say 4060 being a 8 gigabyte card, it can cause problems because there's a couple games now. I think there was a Raiders of the Lost Ark, or one of those kind of games that it now doesn't run as good on 8 gig. It wants more. So the how much memory do you need argument is kind of resurfacing again. So just heads up that it comes with 12. So it's got a little more room than some of its competition. Yeah. The other thing is Poetry Corner. So roses are red, dirt is brown. Users lose their minds when the Wi-Fi goes down. Have a great week, everybody.
I like it. All right. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. I really enjoy it. I mean, this is kind of almost getting old school here.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate everyone that's been here. If you want to follow my stuff, there's, of course, Hackaday. We've got both Floss Weekly and the Security Column is there. I've also got a YouTube channel, which if I can find some time sometime this weekend, I've got a little hardware hack that I'm going to record a quick video about. You can find me there on YouTube and give me a follow. We will be, I think, back. Yes, we will be back next week. I think we're going to take 1 week off right around Christmas, but we should be back next week for yet another Untitled Linux show. We will see you all then. We appreciate everybody that watches us both live and on the download, and we will see you then.